I'm Charna Davis-Wiese, and welcome to UCF Expressions. Wouldn't it be great to be able to look at the world, the good and the bad, the beautiful and the ugly, and put it into perspective, perhaps even question it with beautiful words? Today's guest does just that. Dr. Jennifer Lisa Vest is a poet and a philosopher. In some circles, J.L. Vest, in some circles, Jennifer Lisa Vest. If you see those two, they are interchangeable. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You know, I look at you and I look at your bio and your history, and you are a lot of different things put together. And probably the thing that you're thinking I'm going to ask is not what it is. You were educated in Berkeley, grew up in Chicago, and then came here to Orlando. What a difference of places. And as someone who really takes the world and puts it into words, that has to shape all of your perceptions and how you look at things. Because that's the first thing, I don't know why, that's the first thing that struck me is Berkeley, cool, Chicago. And then Orlando is really a strange mix of
Then there's a lot more than that, because
communities.
I've lived in so many cities in this country, and I've lived abroad too, and I think that has influenced my work a lot.
Because everywhere you go,
People are so
everywhere you go, there
different.
you are, but everywhere you go, people are so much different. Your experiences are so much different.
They are, they really are. I think the greatest thing that I got out of that was that you learn to love people regardless of where they're from and what their views are. And I can take myself into different situations and adapt and accept people for who they are in ways that I think are harder for people who haven't done as much traveling.
I met a mother of my oldest child in school, and she was from Canada. And she said to me, I asked her how she liked, you know, the usual chit-chat, and she says, you wouldn't believe how different people are in Canada from America. I said, you wouldn't believe how different people are in Orlando and Miami.
Yeah.
I mean, but how lucky are, you know, people like you that can really experience so much. And coming as a mixed race poet, is that what you, what a wonderful, rich heritage from both of your parents, Native American and African American.
And also German, Norwegian.
All kinds of stuff.
A few other things thrown in.
Such a rich heritage.
Yeah.
You know, I laugh, you know, we talk about the immigration issue and all of that stuff that's in the news, and I think of the Heinz 57 that my children are. In fact, we've gone to so many different places of worship and have so many different religions in our family. We call ourselves Kajuthalutha Methapelians.
That's good.
And so my kids will say, what does that mean? I said, you can marry anybody you want. But I look at that, as probably you do, with this rich history of culture and places you've lived, as being able to appreciate
It's
people
a gift.
and accept more.
You know, I mean, there's a lot of challenges that come with it, but I primarily see it as a gift at this point. When I was younger, I saw it more as a challenge, and now I see it more as a gift.
Because when you're younger, you want to be like everybody else.
Yeah, well, you don't want people, you know, constantly pointing at you and telling you that you're different or not acceptable or not as good as them. And when you're younger, you care more what people say about you. And I think if you're mixed race, especially if you have an ambiguous phenotype like I do and you travel a lot, you just have to develop a certain amount of love for yourself that allows you to not take so seriously people's views, you know.
And some
And
people
it's
never
difficult.
get to that place.
Yeah, a lot of people never have to deal with that challenge. They don't have to deal with it. But if you do, you either have to get to the point where you don't care so much what people think, you know, or you're just going to be miserable all the time. Because everywhere I go, there's somebody who's got a problem with me, racially, culturally, you know.
Hey, I'm half Jewish, half Catholic. People really have
Right.
I know where you're coming from.
Right, so
I've heard it from a lot of different people. But you know what? You get to the point where you realize that's their problem.
Yeah.
But what rich cultures.
Yeah,
And
I've been
such
fortunate.
amazing, you're a philosopher, amazing philosophies from
It's
both
really
sides.
informed my philosophy a lot. You know, I do African and Native American philosophy, and when I teach, even when I teach the core courses like ethics and intro, I teach them all cross-culturally, and much more so than a lot of other philosophers. And that's a big part of that is because I'm from a mixed background. I have more of an appreciation of different cultures. And I teach Asian philosophy as well. And I never went into philosophy with any assumptions about it being the domain of one group, and which other people tend to have those assumptions. And so when I go into the classroom, I always do everything, you know, from the four corners of the earth. So it's had a big impact on
Must
my
be hard to fit
work.
that all in one semester.
It is. It's challenging. A lot more work on curriculum has to be done.
When you were little Jennifer Lisa,
Mm-hmm.
is this what you knew you'd want to do?
Well, you know, I was a bit of a troublemaker from early on. So I was the kind of kid that when they asked me in school, you know, what race are you? And they wanted me to pick a box. I remember being like 5 or 6 and saying, no, I don't fit into one of those boxes. That's not who I am. And I remember questioning from very early age these racial categories and these, you know, the segregation of cultures and religions. And I always wanted to be able to cross boundaries, and I always wanted to be able to be friends with people who didn't belong to the group I was supposed to be with. And so, yeah, I think early on I wanted to find a way to bring people together across these divides, and I think that was something that started pretty early.
Do you find in the different cultures, you know, the African and the Native American, is there something that's completely at odds or completely different in the philosophy, or is there something that really is very similar? Because I know with the Native American it's honoring, you correct me if I'm wrong, honoring nature and honoring the individual and the earth.
I guess probably the biggest difference, usually I focus on more on similarities, but I think maybe one of the biggest differences is the difference between the anthropocentrism of a lot of African philosophies versus the kind of de-emphasis placed on the human in Native American philosophies. So in African philosophies there's more, you know, a focus on the human as the center of creation. But they both share a belief in the spirit inhabiting everything. And they both share, you know, both, and I'm really, you know, generalizing over huge differences between African philosophers and between Native American philosophers. But in general, there is a shared understanding of spirit inhabiting everything and connecting us all. But there's a slightly different focus in terms of the centrality of humans.
So can we hear some of your poetry?
Sure.
I've actually read some of them, I've got to admit, and it's very moving, very strong, very powerful.
Thank you.
Which one are you going to show us?
I think I'm going to start with Names, which is the title piece from the poetry book that I used to have out, Names, which is now out of print. And it's actually it's a historical piece about the Seminole, and I'm Seminole, Florida Seminole. And I actually wrote it in a class I took with Christos, who is a Native American feminist philosopher who I was fortunate to have a class with. And she said, write a poem that tells the story of your people. And so this is the poem that I wrote. It's called Names. We call ourselves the Seminole people, Miccosukee Creek, Ocklawaha Trail. But we've gone by other names we won't translate, names we can't repeat, that are nobody's business but our own, and other names they didn't want us to keep. We come from many places, but we were always here. Before the Spanish came, we were Kanayuksagi, the original Peninsulares. Kunti bread eaters, Calusa, Temukua, Ayes, Tequesta, Apalachi, Alachua. We were sailors, farmers, fishers. Our priests danced for us. Our queens protected us. Augustine was not our saint. They called us fierce and powerful peoples, death-obsessed, serpent worshippers, giants and smooth-faced pirates, before half of us left for Cuba, Bahamas, Nicaragua, and the rest of us who survived Spanish Christian kindness, baptism at the point of a sword, escaped up north. Before the French came, we were Natchez, Biloxi, Alabami, Chichamacha, Toltec. We venerated the women, the dead, and the sun with song, smoke, and shell-laden pyramids. We spoke many languages. We knew all our neighbors. They called us mound builders, sun worshippers, formidable foes. When they grew envious and impatient, before the messengers could gather 5 nations of warriors, they killed women and children, fought a war of extinction. Those of us who weren't sold to English plantations down south or to Haiti escaped to the east. Before the English came, we were Hichiti, Cherokee, Yuchi, Yamasee, Tunica, Oconee, many peoples coming together, creating and recreating ourselves, moving when necessary, united against a common foe. We became a nation of nations. We survived in our stories. We learned to love strangers. We traveled south. Before Jackson, before rabid, flesh-hunting Carolinians came, we were fluid and raceless, Igbo, Dahomey, Ga, Hausa, Yoruba. We were U and Dogon, farmers teaching hunters, clans expanding. We were Miccosukee, Tallahassee, Muskogee, allies and kinfolk, before they called us mulatto, mestizo, musty, Negro, stolen property, Creek. Before they tried to separate us out, one from another, we were families. Our neighbors called us Ufala, Esti Seminole, those who camp at a distance, remnants and renegades, trailblazers and healers. Clever and careful, we fought war upon war. We called ourselves Kitishe, Luski, Hatki, red, black, and white. Estakari, Estaluski, Kanyu Estachati, people of the pointed land. Regardless of Oakley, we were Yati, human. We traveled in circles. But they could not defeat us, so they called us savages, could not baptize us, so they called us heathens, could not find us, so they called us wiped out, could not understand us, so they called us mysterious, could not educate us, so they called us backwards, could not convince us to learn their language, so they called us hostile, shy, afraid. But they were like pahekoshle to us, and we had ayekche. We had medicine for that. We kept moving. We took in strangers. We moved south, back to the point, to a place where soft, pink people could not survive. Many of their soldiers died. They took to passing laws and telling stories about us, and they made up names. When they couldn't identify our diversity anymore, they called us Florida Indians or Florida Creeks or else Seminoles, convinced it was an English corruption of Cimarron, Spanish for wild man, and not the name our cousins gave us. When they got tired of fighting us, we became a legend. They spent 100 years trying to find the last unconquered Indians, sent in the army, government surveyors, sports, fishermen, anthropologists, missionaries. But we were untrackable and intractable when found. We cost the government an embarrassment of riches and dead white man. In their eyes, we were the last frontier. So they did what a man does who cannot fish. They drained the whole pond in search of us, brought in heavy machinery and sucked dry the glorious Everglades, turned the swamps to sand and rock and clay, rounded us up to ask our names. Some names are for lovers, others are for friends. Our names are for our people, and we never told them to white men. We said Sally, Tommy, Cypress, James. You didn't understand why we all had the same names. But before name giving or name calling, we were here. We say before you left Spain in search of your splintered self, we were here. Before you realized England was cramped and dirty, we were here. Before you left France for your piece of the pie, we were here. Before you tried to carve a nation out of our expatriation, before you defined your red-blooded American selves in terms of our absence, we were here. Some names sort, others deceive. These names tell stories historians refuse to believe. We call ourselves the Seminole people, Miccosukee, Creek, Oklawaha, Trail. We call you Ochcoche, the smoke in our eyes. Thanks.
We'll be right back.
Attendance, people, listen up. Albertson.
Here.
Barnes.
Here.
Swain.
Here.
Reyes.
Here.
Perez.
Here.
Clark.
Here.
Gerbic.
Here.
Sellers.
Here.
Nguyen.
Here.
Tomei.
Here.
And Miller.
Here.
In our classrooms and throughout our community, UCF stands for opportunity.
We're back. We're talking with Dr. Jennifer Lisa Vest, or J.L. Vest, who is a poet and a philosopher, and you just read your poem, Names, about your heritage, your Seminole heritage. And I almost found myself, I found myself envious of that. of you knowing that, of the real sense of history and knowing where you came from. I just think that is such a gift and so wonderful. And I'm so glad that you share it.
Thank you.
And was that painful? Or was that freeing, or a little bit of both to write that?
Yeah, a little bit of both. You know, I grew up with some knowledge of the Seminole, and then when I got older, I actually was in my grad program, and I was taking courses with Native American faculty, and they were saying things to me like, "Oh, the southeastern tribes are all gone, and they've lost their culture." And there was actually some, kind of negative views within the Native community about southeastern people as not being really Indian enough, because we're very mixed. We're very mixed race, and we were conquered first. Seminole were never conquered, but supposedly a lot of tribes were conquered.
So you had the troubles first,
right? And so there are going to be different, patterns of assimilation and acculturation, and so I was very angry about the fact that this professor of mine, who was Lakota, was telling me, "Oh, you southeastern Indians are, you're not really that Indian." And so it really propelled me to go and do my own research, and I ended up doing all this research, and I ended up coming down to a couple of reservations in Florida.
So this did not come from your family?
Yeah, I was inspired by what I knew and how that conflicted with what I read, because when I started to read these histories written by like anthropologists, non-Indian, even the most famous historian of the Seminole, the Sturtevant, his stories were not right. And so I went to the reservation and I said, "Look, these don't match what I've heard from my grandmother. Tell me, what's the truth?" And they said, "Oh, you're right. These stories that the anthropologist wrote down, they're all wrong." And they thought it was really funny. And so I felt really compelled to write a piece that would set the record straight. So in my poem, I try to make it clear, what the true history of the Seminole is, that it's this coming together of people throughout Florida. And originally they had different tribal names, the Tequesta, the Ayas.
I didn't know that.
And they came together, and they also joined forces with Africans who had escaped slavery, and they formed this new group. And the historians don't portray it that way. They talk about Seminole being creeks that ran south, and it's just not true. If you talk to the elders, that's just not the history of the tribe. And so so part of it was, emotional and based on my own family history, and part of it was me wanting to, get the story told in a way that matched what actual Seminole people say the story is, as opposed to these historians and their own accounts.
And it's amazing how things have changed. Listening to this, I told you I've been learning what my child is learning now, my little girl who's in the 5th grade, and she's being told a lot of the truth. Mm-hmm. When I was a child, it was all almost like a movie, a movie script with written the way you wanted people to see it. But she's told how the colonists tricked and used and cajoled in many ways. Mm-hmm. And she's told of the ones who didn't, which are few and far between, it seems. So getting something like your words out, it almost seems like the people you went to, the Seminoles you went to, it was like, "Oh, that's funny, it doesn't matter what they think or what they know," but you want to get the word out, you want the truth to be known.
Yeah, because I walk in both worlds, and so it matters to me. I'm not living on the reservation. I'm living out here, and I'm dealing with people and their stereotypes and their attitudes and their misunderstanding.
I totally understand walking in both worlds.
Yeah.
And isn't it funny how sometimes within one group, the exclusion is just as, the exclusion and the misconceptions and the ill treatment can be just as vehement, if not more so, than between two different groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm fortunate in that I was treated very well on the reservation, and we can sit down and joke about the differences in our stories. There are the Seminole is a very unusual group in that there are Seminole all over the country and actually all over the world because of the particular history of dispersion and exiling that went on. So you have Oklahoma Seminole and Florida Seminole. You have 5 reservations in Florida just of the Seminole. Then you have other Seminole who aren't even federally recognized, who call themselves Miccosukee, or they call themselves other things. You have Seminole in the Bahamas, you have Seminole in Mexico, and so there are a lot of different stories. And we can sit down. I've been able to sit down with people and laugh about the conflicts between our accounts of what really happened. So people will say, oh, you know, the people who left Florida or who left the community here are the sellouts, right? They went and mixed, like my family went and mixed with blacks and whites, right? And then I'll say, oh no, from what I was told, you people are the sellouts because you went and took this reservation, which the Seminole never believed in reservations because we weren't conquered. And we can laugh about it, you know, because this is just the kind of the necessary fallout.
And it's in every family there's that too.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like a larger version of a familial kind of thing that's going on. Will you read us another poem?
Yeah. And I brought
making you work hard.
No, not at all. I think I'm going to read one. I write about a lot of different things, so I brought a different selection. But I think I'm going to read one about women changing topics, you know, pretty severely.
Not for you.
Not for me,
You're both.
because I do write about everything.
Right.
But this poem is about sexual abuse, and I wrote it. I dedicated it to my god sister Donna, but I really wrote it for all the women out there who've had to deal with this, and it's too widespread, you know. So this poem is called "We Are the Women." We are the women we do not want our daughters to become stalwart, steadfast survivors, those who have overcome. We are the women our mothers cautioned us against, as if we had choices, as if our child mouths had voices, as if anything or anyone could keep us safe. And we have become expert forgetters, better liars than most, because we don't admit it, but we remember, sometimes so vividly, but do not say, afraid, ashamed of the strength the past has to grab a hold, to wreck us even as adults, years later, so many resolutions later. Yes, we remember, try as we might to forget the blurred and blunted days and nights, or a singular time being held harshly in the dark, made to keep secrets, so many secrets, forced to live secret lives. As children, we became living shrouds, tortured by our entrapment, threatened into silence, ugly, little numerous, little silences. Until for a while every man that looked like an uncle, a neighbor, a brother, was menacing. Every woman that looked like a mother was disappointing. Every word a betrayal. And we learned to hide our eyes for fear that people would see the injuries inside. As adults, we longed to bleed, to have visible scars we could point to, doctor's bills we could pay, a way to fix this. The silence is suffocating, but the talking terrifies us more. We become expert at forgetting. We forget with each falling autumn leaf. We forget with the first heavy snow. We forget with the showers in spring. We make an art of it. We are creative forgetters. We spin stories out of the holes left by the truth we have deleted. We are poetic forgetters. We write poems about everything but. We are success stories, high status women. We are watchful forgetters. We protect the young. We have a marvelous capacity to laugh. We have to. For we are the women we never intended to be, with survival stories we never intended would be our own.
That's wonderful. How does it feel to read your own work each time?
Usually,
you get the same feeling?
Usually if I'm really into it, I really feel the emotion as I'm reading it.
I can tell.
And it also depends on who I'm reading it to. So if I have an audience, their energy then also will impact me. What their energy is, whether or not they're really feeling it too, affects how much I feel it.
Writing about things that are so deeply personal and deeply moving, it's almost like good on one end and good on the other. For you to get this on paper, but then over and over and over again, each person that hears this, perhaps perceiving it differently, each one, it must be a wonderful sense of accomplishment. Or do you even go there? Do you even, most of us being women don't grant ourselves the opportunity or the pleasure of saying, hey, you know, This is good stuff.
Well, I don't think I'd be able to keep reading it if I hadn't convinced myself that it was going to have some sort of healing effect. You know, I think the reason I talk about forgetting in silence is because we don't talk about these things.
Right.
It's very hard to talk about these things. Nobody wants to talk about these things.
And I think everybody has a story,
Yeah.
some story, no matter how little, which is not little to them.
And I mean, that's one of the reasons I finally wrote this poem. You know, I talk about, you know, we're poetic forgetters, and you know, I had a artist group once of 17 women that I had formed, and we went around the room one day, and it turned out that out of the 17, 15 had suffered some kind of sexual abuse. And we talked about, why aren't we writing about this? Well, it's too difficult to write about, or we're embarrassed, or we're ashamed.
Or how is someone going to perceive it and perceive me?
It's so widespread that I felt this really needs to be written about. And you know, as I've gotten older, I keep finding out that everybody I know have been touched by this experience in their family or their own life. You know, my students, I don't know how many times my students in my feminist classes will raise their hand and say, well, that, you know, this happened to me when we're talking about sexual abuse during a particular part of the curriculum. And
that's one thing I talked about when we first started this. It's wonderful to read your work, in that even the most ugly thing can sound beautiful in a way that you can let it in. It's okay to let it in, it's okay to listen to this. And it's a wonderful vehicle to get that information out.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things that really can't be dealt with outside of poetry without it being just too painful.
Too harsh.
Yeah. It's some things you just have to be very careful about how you say them.
Well, how lucky we are to have you. And you're not going to believe this, but we're out of time. Okay. we have a whole notebook here. You're going to have to come back.
Okay.
Dr. Jennifer Lisa Best, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much
Thanks
for
for
joining
having
us.
me.
And thanks for sharing your heart with us. Thank you for joining us. See you next time on UCF Expressions.